The great meeting hall of Nexus Prime stretched out like a crystal cathedral. 47 different species filled the curved seats that rose up toward the ceiling. Their voices mixed together in a strange music of clicks, hums, and spoken words. This was the Galactic Prosperity Council, where the most important decisions about trade and peace were made. Ambassador Sarah Chun sat in the back rows with her small team of humans. She watched the debate about mining rights in the Vega system. The Zelathi Empire wanted more territory. The Keth Collective demanded better prices for their technology. The Vrex hegemony complained about shipping costs. Chun looked at her notes. The humans had a different concern today. 3-star systems in the Outer Rim were suffering from a terrible war. Millions of people had lost their homes. They needed food, medicine, and safe places to live. The human government wanted to help, but they needed council support. The chair recognizes the Zelathi delegation, announced the session leader. Council President Varric stood up. He was tall and impressive, with silver skin and chrome horns that caught the light. When he spoke, his voice filled the entire hall. The Empire supports expanding mining operations. These worlds will bring prosperity to all council members. The Keth representative spoke next. Its body looked like a walking machine made of metal and crystal. The collective agrees. Efficient resource extraction benefits the galactic economy. Emotional concerns should not interfere with logical progress. Chun raised her hand. The human delegation requests time to speak. A few representatives turned to look at her. Most kept talking among themselves. President Varric glanced at his schedule display. The chair recognizes the human delegation. Please, be brief. Chun stood up and activated her translator. Thank you, President Varric. The human government would like to propose an emergency aid package for the refugee. Crisis in the Outer Rim. 3 systems are in desperate need of humanitarian support. What kind of support? Asked a delegate from the Thanos Confederation. Medical supplies, temporary housing, food distribution, and transport ships to move civilians to safety, Chun replied. We estimate it would cost about 2 million council credits and require coordination between multiple species. President Varric tapped his claws on his desk. Ambassador Chun, while the council appreciates human concern for these matters, we must focus on larger galactic issues. The mining expansion in Vega will generate far more revenue than any aid package could cost. But sir, people are dying right now, Chun said. We have medical ships ready to deploy and volunteers trained in disaster relief. A Vrex delegate laughed. It sounded like stones grinding together. The humans always want to spend resources on lost causes. These border wars happen all the time. The strong survive, the weak do not. This is natural law. Perhaps, President Varric said in a voice that sounded polite but cold. The human delegation should focus on developing their own systems before concerning themselves with galactic affairs. Your species has been in space for less than 200 years. These complex issues require experience you do not yet possess. Murmurs of agreement came from around the hall. The Keth representatives' lights blinked in what Chen knew was their version of approval. Several delegates nodded their heads or made similar gestures. Chun felt her cheeks get warm, but she kept her voice steady. We understand we are new to the council, but human medical teams have successfully helped in 17 different crisis situations over the past 5 years. Our disaster response protocols have been adopted by 6 other species. Small-scale operations, dismissed as Zelathi Trade Minister. Nothing compared to the infrastructure projects we are discussing today. The vote was called quickly. The mining expansion passed with 43 votes in favor. The human aid proposal received only 4 votes, all from smaller species that rarely spoke during council sessions. Chum gathered her papers while the representatives moved on to debating. Shipping Lane Regulations. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, the head of the Human Medical Corps, leaned over to whisper in her ear. "This is the third time this year they've voted down our humanitarian requests," she said. "I know," Chum replied quietly. "But we keep trying." After the session ended, Chun approached President Varix near the main exit. He was talking with several important delegates about dinner plans. "President Varix, could I have a moment?" He turned toward her with a patient smile. "Of course, Ambassador Chun. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to inform the Council that humanity will be re-evaluating our participation in upcoming Council initiatives." "Oh?" He seemed distracted, watching the Keth delegation prepare to leave. "What kind of re-evaluation?" "We need to assess whether our resources are being used effectively within the current Council framework," Chun said carefully. "We may need to redirect our efforts to areas where we can make a meaningful contribution." "I see." Varix nodded without really listening. "Well, every species must find their place in the galactic community. I'm sure humans will figure out where they fit best. Thank you for your time, President Varix." "Of course, my dear. Good luck with your re-evaluation." Chun walked back to her delegation. The other humans had already packed up their materials. They looked tired and frustrated. "Any luck?" asked Commander Torres, the human military liaison. "About what you'd expect," Chun said. "Come on, let's go home." As they left the crystal towers of Nexus Prime, none of the other delegates paid attention to their departure. The humans were just another minor species leaving another routine council session. They had no idea that this quiet exit would change everything. On the transport ship back to Earth, Chun stared out the window at the stars. She thought about the refugee camps they could have built, the medical stations they could have established, the lives they could have saved. Instead, the Council wanted to dig more holes in distant planets. "What are your orders, Ambassador?" asked Dr. Hawthorne. Chun was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "Send a message to all human outposts and medical stations. Tell them to prepare for new instructions. It's time we stop asking permission to help people." The ship flew through space toward Earth, carrying news that would soon reshape the galaxy. But for now, the Council continued their debates about mining and profits, completely unaware that they had just made the biggest mistake in their long history. 3 months after the Council meeting, strange things began happening across the galaxy. But most species were too busy with their own affairs to notice. On Station Beta 7, in the neutral zone between Keth and Vrex space, Captain Maria Santos received a coded message from Earth. She read it twice before calling her crew together. In the main cargo bay, "We're going home," she announced to the 20 humans who ran the small trading post. "Home? For how long?" asked their first officer. "Permanently. All human operations in neutral space are being closed." The crew looked confused. Station Beta 7 had been their home for 3 years. They had built good relationships with traders from dozens of species. The station provided fuel, supplies, and repairs for ships traveling the busy corridor between 2 major empires. "What about our contracts?" someone asked. "Cancelled. Earth is buying out all our agreements and paying compensation to affected parties. We leave next week." Similar conversations happened at 37 other human outposts scattered across the galaxy. Trading stations, supply depots, and small diplomatic offices all received the same message. "Pack up. Come home." No explanations given. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne stood in the command center of Mercy Station, watching her staff prepare to leave. The medical facility orbited a dead planet in the outer rim, serving as a neutral hospital for anyone who needed help. They treated injured miners, sick traders, and refugees from various conflicts. "Doctor, the Vrex military is asking why we're shutting down," reported her communications officer. They say their soldiers depend on our trauma center. Tell them to contact their own medical corps, Hawthorne replied. But doctor, the nearest Rex hospital is 4 systems away. If someone gets badly hurt out here, that's not our responsibility anymore. Hawthorne had run medical operations for 12 years. She had saved thousands of lives from dozens of species. Now Earth wanted all medical personnel to return immediately. The official reason was budget restructuring, but she knew the real cause. The Council had made it clear that human help was not wanted or needed. On the border between Zalathi and Thanospace, Commander Jack Torres received his orders while mediating a dispute between 2 patrol fleets. For 6 months, he had been preventing small incidents from becoming larger conflicts. His ship, the UE's Peacekeeper, served as a neutral meeting ground where commanders could talk instead of fight. Sir, both fleets are asking what will happen when we leave, reported his communications officer. That's up to them to figure out, Torres said. The Zalathi commander sent an angry message demanding that Torres stay until a replacement mediator could be found. The Thanos commander accused Earth of abandoning their duties. Torres ignored both messages and ordered his ship to return to human space. Across the galaxy, humans quietly packed up and left. Most other species barely noticed. The Kef Collective's computers registered the closure of human facilities as minor efficiency gains. The Vrex hegemony saw opportunities to expand into abandoned territories. The Zalathi Empire was too busy with their new mining operations to care about. A few missing trading posts President Varix received. A formal notice from Ambassador Chun. The document stated that humanity was suspending active participation in Council initiatives, pending internal review of galactic policy. It was filed in the Council archives along with hundreds of other routine communications. The first real sign of trouble came from the refugee camps in the Outer Rim. For years, humans had quietly managed a network of temporary settlements for displaced people. These camps provided food, medical care, and transportation to safer worlds. They operated with minimal funding and no fanfare, helping anyone who asked for assistance. Commissioner Yelm, a Thanos official responsible for border security, noticed the camps were closing. Where are all the refugees supposed to go? She asked her staff. The humans didn't say. They just shut down the facilities and left. What about the people still living there? Unknown. Perhaps they will relocate on their own. Yelm tried to contact the human coordinator, but the communication channels had been disconnected. She sent a message to the Council requesting guidance, but received only an automated response saying her inquiry would be processed in due course. Meanwhile, thousands of refugees found themselves without shelter, food, or medical care. Some tried to reach core worlds, but were turned away at border checkpoints. Others crowded into already overcrowded settlements, overwhelming local resources. The situation grew worse when Dr. Sarah Kim, the last human epidemiologist working in alien space, packed up her research station on Cygnus 4 for 5 years. She had been monitoring disease patterns across the Outer Rim, providing early warnings about potential outbreaks. Her work had prevented 3 major epidemics from spreading beyond their origin systems. Doctor, what about the Thanos Plague research? Asked her Zalathi assistant. Take it to the Keth Medical Collective. Maybe they can figure it out. But the collective doesn't have anyone trained in cross-species pathology. Kim sealed her laboratory and handed over her access codes. That's not my problem anymore. Her research files contained data on hundreds of diseases that could jump between species. She had been tracking genetic mutations and preparing vaccines for potential outbreaks. Without her early warning system, the next epidemic would spread unchecked in the shipping lanes. Human cargo vessels began disappearing from regular routes. The Galaxy Express Corporation, run by the Vrex hegemony, initially celebrated the reduced competition, but they soon discovered problems with their expansion plans. "Why can't we deliver supplies to the mining stations in Sector 12?" demanded a Vrex trade executive. "The route passes through 3 different territorial boundaries," explained his logistics coordinator. "We need landing permits from each government, so get them. Each species requires different documentation. The Zealothi want environmental impact studies. The Keth demand technical specifications for all cargo. The Thanis require cultural sensitivity training for our crews. This is ridiculous. How did the humans manage these routes?" The coordinator checked his records. They had special diplomatic status as neutral carriers. They also provided medical services and emergency transport in exchange for simplified customs procedures. "Can't we get the same status?" The Vrex hegemony has been at war with 2 of these governments within the last decade. They don't trust us. Similar problems appeared throughout the galaxy. Trade routes that humans had quietly maintained for years became complicated and expensive. Diplomatic channels that humans had kept open through informal relationships suddenly closed. Emergency services that humans had provided without recognition simply vanished. But the major powers didn't connect these problems to human withdrawal. They assumed the difficulties were temporary glitches that would resolve themselves. After all, what could one small species really contribute to galactic civilization? Ambassador Chun spent her days in her Earth office, reading reports from returning personnel. Every message told the same story. Years of careful relationship building, medical assistance, and quiet diplomacy were being abandoned. The network of connections that humans had built across the galaxy was dissolving. "Any regrets?" asked Dr. Hawthorne during one of their planning meetings. Chun looked out her window at the blue sky and white clouds of Earth. "We tried to help. They made it clear our help wasn't wanted. Now they'll get what they asked for." The withdrawal continued steadily and quietly. Humans had never been loud or dramatic about their galactic role. They left the same way they had worked, without fanfare, without threats, without demanding attention. They simply stopped being there when other species needed them. And slowly, the galaxy began to fall apart. 6 months after the humans stopped coming to council meetings, problems started appearing across the galaxy. At first, they seemed like separate, unrelated issues. But slowly, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Commissioner Yelm stood in her office on Tanis Prime, staring at 3 emergency reports on her desk. The first described overcrowded refugee settlements along the Outer Rim. The second warned about increasing border tensions with the Zealothi Empire. The third reported a mysterious disease outbreak on Cygnus 4. "Get me a meeting with the Interior Minister," she told her assistant. "We have a crisis developing." The refugee situation had grown far worse than anyone expected. Without the human camps to process displaced people, millions of beings were flowing directly into core worlds. Space stations designed for a few thousand residents now housed tens of thousands. Food supplies ran low. Waste systems broke down. Fights erupted between different species competing for limited resources. On New Vrax, the main processing center for Vrex space, Governor Thak faced an angry crowd outside his government building. 3 different species of refugees demanded housing, food, and transportation to safer worlds. "Where are the temporary camps?" shouted a Thanis mother holding her sick child. "What camps?" Thak replied. "The neutral camps. The ones that help refugees." Thak checked his records. "There are no neutral camps in this sector. The Vrex hegemony provides assistance through our own social services, but your services only help Vrex citizens." "That is correct." The crowd grew angrier. Someone threw a piece of debris at the building. Security forces moved in, but they were outnumbered 10 to 1. The governor ordered his staff to barricade themselves inside while he sent an emergency message to the military. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Species that had never directly managed refugee crises found themselves overwhelmed. The invisible network that had quietly moved people to safety was gone, and no one knew how to replace it. Trade problems made everything worse. Captain Vex, a Zelathi merchant, sat in his ship for 3 days waiting for clearance to land on a Keth commercial station. His cargo hold was full of medicine desperately needed on 6 different worlds. Why is this taking so long? He demanded over the communication system. Your documentation is incomplete, replied the Keth station controller. You need environmental clearances for biological products. I've been trading this route for 10 years. I never needed special clearances before. Previous procedures were informal agreements not recognized by Keth regulations. Proper documentation must be filed through official channels. Captain Vex checked his computer. The official process required 17 different forms, approval from 4 separate departments, and a waiting period of 6 to 8 weeks. By then, the medicine would be useless. This is insane. People will die waiting for your bureaucracy. The Keth Collective prioritizes safety and efficiency. Informal agreements create inefficient chaos. Vex finally gave up and sold his cargo to a black market dealer at half price. The medicine never reached the people who needed it. The same problems affected shipping routes throughout the galaxy. Cargo that had moved smoothly for years suddenly got stuck in legal complications. Routes that had been profitable became costly nightmares of permits, inspections, and delays. President Varix received increasingly urgent reports from his trade advisors. Sir, our merchant fleet is reporting significant delays on major shipping routes, said Trade Minister Kelks. What kind of delays? Border crossings that used to take hours now take days. Cargo inspections are more thorough. Several governments have changed their trade policies without notice. Why are we hearing about this now? The delays started small, but they're getting worse. Some trade routes are becoming unprofitable. Varix studied the data on his screen. Commercial traffic between major systems had dropped by 15%. Several important trade agreements were falling apart due to administrative difficulties. Contact our diplomatic corps. They need to renegotiate these trade procedures. Sir, many of our diplomats report that informal communication channels with other governments have become less reliable. Varix frowned. What do you mean, less reliable? Meetings that used to happen quickly now require formal requests. Government officials who used to respond to direct communication now insist on going through proper diplomatic procedures. Everything takes much longer. Meanwhile, military tensions increased along several borders. Commander Zex of the Thanos Defense Force watched Zealotha patrol ships through his scanner display. The ships were crossing into disputed territory again. Should we intercept them? Asked his tactical officer. According to our agreements, yes. But if we do, they might see it as an act of aggression. What would the neutral mediator recommend? Zex realized he couldn't answer that question. For months, a human ship had patrolled this border region, providing neutral communication between the two fleets. Commanders from both sides could meet on the human vessel to discuss problems before they escalated. That ship was gone now. Send a direct message to the Zealothi commander. Tell them they're violating territorial boundaries. Sir, direct military communications often get misunderstood. Maybe we should contact the diplomatic corps first. That could take days. By then, they might establish a permanent position in our space. Zex made his decision. His ships moved to intercept the Zealothi patrol. Within an hour, both fleets were facing each other with weapons ready. A small misunderstanding about navigation had turned into a potential battle. The same pattern repeated across multiple border regions. Without neutral mediators to facilitate communication, minor incidents became major confrontations. Military commanders who had learned to trust human peacekeepers now had no way to talk to their enemies except through weapons. On Cygnus 4, Dr. Marin noticed strange symptoms in several patients. The disease spread quickly between different species, causing severe respiratory distress. He had never seen anything like it. "Contact the Galactic Disease Control Center," he told his assistant. "Sir, there is no Galactic Disease Control Center. Each species maintains its own medical database." "Then contact the cross-species pathology expert, Doctor." "What was her name? Kim? The human researcher?" "Dr. Kim left the system 6 months ago. Her research station was shut down." Marin felt a cold fear in his stomach. "Who has access to her disease-tracking data?" "Unknown. The research files were transferred to the Keth Medical Collective, but they don't have anyone trained to interpret cross-species pathology." The disease continued to spread. Without early warning systems or expert analysis, medical professionals had no way to predict its behavior or develop effective treatments. What should have been a contained outbreak began moving to other worlds. All across the galaxy, systems that had worked smoothly for years started breaking down. But the major governments still didn't understand why. They saw each problem as a separate issue requiring individual solutions. None of them connected the failures to the absence of one small, quiet species that had been working behind the scenes. President Varix called an emergency council session to address increasing administrative difficulties in galactic commerce and security. "We need to identify the causes of these coordination failures," he announced to the assembled delegates. The Keth representatives' lights flashed in analytical patterns. "The collective recommends a comprehensive study to identify inefficient processes in interspecies cooperation." "How long would such a study take?" asked a Vrex delegate. "Approximately 18 to 24 months for complete analysis." "People are dying while we study," protested Commissioner. "Yeah, we need solutions now. Emotional responses lead to inefficient decisions," replied the Keth representative. "Proper analysis ensures optimal solutions." The council voted to fund the study. In the meantime, the problems continued to grow worse. Trade routes failed. Border conflicts escalated. Disease spread unchecked. Refugee crises overwhelmed government resources. And somewhere in human space, Ambassador Chun read the reports with grim satisfaction. The galaxy was finally learning what happened when they rejected the help they didn't think they needed, but the worst was yet to come. 1 year after humanity's withdrawal from galactic affairs, the Council faced its worst crisis in 3 centuries. What had started as minor administrative problems had grown into a catastrophic collapse of interstellar cooperation. Zara Vol, a young Zalathi analyst working in the Council's Economic Research Department, sat surrounded by data displays in her cramped office. She had been assigned to investigate the mysterious decline in galactic trade efficiency. After months of analysis, she was beginning to see a pattern that terrified her. "Computer, show me a timeline of trade route disruptions," she commanded. A holographic display appeared above her desk, showing red dots scattered across a map of the galaxy. Each dot represented a failed trade agreement, delayed cargo shipment, or abandoned commercial route. "Computer, overlay this data with refugee crisis incidents." Blue dots appeared on the map, showing locations where refugee management had failed or humanitarian crises had developed. "Computer, add diplomatic communication failures." Green dots filled the display, representing places where international negotiations had broken down or border conflicts had escalated. Vol stared at the pattern. The failures weren't random. They all started at the same time, and they all affected the same types of activities: trade mediation, humanitarian assistance, diplomatic communication, emergency medical response. Computer, show me the locations of human facilities that closed in the last 18 months. Yellow dots appeared on the map. Vol's breath caught in her throat. The yellow dots matched perfectly with the red, blue, and green ones. Every trade route failure, every refugee crisis, every diplomatic breakdown had happened in areas where humans had previously operated. She ran the analysis 3 more times to be sure. The correlation was 97%. The galaxy's problems weren't caused by random administrative failures or natural political changes. They were caused by the systematic removal of human involvement from galactic affairs. Vol printed her findings and ran to her supervisor's office. Minister Calx, I need to speak with you immediately. Trade Minister Calx looked up from his desk, annoyed at the interruption. What is it, Vol? I'm preparing for the emergency council session. Sir, I know why galactic trade is collapsing. The study commission won't report for another year. How could you possibly? It's the humans, sir. Everything that's going wrong is happening in places where humans used to work. Calx frowned. What do you mean? Vol activated her portable display and showed him the overlapping data patterns. Look at this. Trade route failures, refugee crises, diplomatic breakdowns, medical emergencies. They all correspond exactly with areas where humans withdrew their operations. That's impossible. Humans barely participated in galactic affairs. They were minor players at best. That's what we thought, sir. But look at the data. They weren't minor players. They were running everything. Calx studied the display more carefully. His expression grew grim as he understood the implications. Get me a meeting with President Varix immediately. 2 hours later, Vol stood before the full council leadership, her hands shaking as she presented her findings. President Varix, 4 senior ministers, and representatives from the major powers listened in stunned silence. According to your analysis, said the Keth representative, human withdrawal has caused a systematic failure of galactic infrastructure. Yes, sir. Humans weren't just participants in galactic civilization. They were the foundation that held it together. President Varix activated his own data system. Show me specific examples. Vol pulled up her detailed research. The refugee camps in the Outer Rim. We thought they were minor humanitarian facilities. Actually, they processed over 30 million displaced people every year. Without them, refugees are flooding directly into core worlds, overwhelming local resources. What about trade routes? Asked the Vrex delegate. Humans operated as neutral carriers on 43 major shipping routes. They could cross territorial boundaries because all governments trusted them to remain non-political. When they left, those routes became contested zones requiring complex diplomatic negotiations for every cargo shipment. Medical services? Humans provided cross-species medical research and emergency response across 17 sectors. They were the only species with expertise in diseases that could jump between different biological types. Without their early warning systems, we're seeing the worst epidemic in galactic history. The Thanos representative looks sick. The plague on Cygnus 4 has spread to 12 systems and shows no signs of slowing down. The human researcher who could have stopped it was dismissed from her position 6 months ago. President Varix was quiet for a long moment. What about diplomatic mediation? Humans mediated approximately 60% of all border disputes and trade disagreements. They provided neutral meeting grounds where enemies could communicate without losing face. Since they withdrew, diplomatic solutions have become almost impossible to achieve. This is incredible, muttered the Vrex delegate. How did we not know about this? Vol had prepared for this question. because humans worked quietly. They didn't demand recognition or credit for their activities. They solved problems before they became crises. They prevented wars instead of winning them. They healed diseases before they spread. We only noticed their importance after they stopped doing it. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The species they had dismissed as inexperienced and insignificant had actually been managing the complex systems that made galactic civilization possible. How much of our current crisis is directly attributable to human withdrawal? Asked President Varix. Vol checked her calculations one more time. Approximately 85%, sir. The remaining 15% represents natural problems that would have occurred anyway, but which humans would normally have helped us manage. Minister Kalk spoke up. What about our expansion into former human territories? The new mining operations, commercial zones, expanded shipping routes? All failing, sir. It turns out that human territories weren't empty space waiting to be claimed. They were carefully managed neutral zones that allowed different species to interact safely. When we moved into those areas with our own political and military presence, we destroyed the neutral status that made them valuable. The Keth representative's lights flashed in what Vol recognized as deep analysis mode. The collective's expansion into the Sagittarius Arm has encountered unexpected obstacles. Our advanced terraforming technology proves ineffective on those worlds. Yes, sir. Humans develop specialized techniques for working with the unique mineral compositions in that region. Without their soil conditioning protocols, standard terraforming methods actually make the planets less habitable. Why didn't they share this technology with us? Vol pulled up another file. They tried to. The Keth Collective rejected their proposals as inefficient primitive methods and emotional, rather than logical approaches to planetary development. The silence stretched on for several minutes. Finally, President Varix spoke. What is the current status of Human Council relations? Non-existent, sir. All human diplomatic channels have been closed. They've withdrawn completely to their own space and refuse to respond to any communications. Have we tried to negotiate? Yes, sir. Ambassador Chen's final message to the Council stated that humanity offered partnership, but the Council demanded subservience. They offered aid, but we demanded silence. She said they were withdrawing, not in anger, but in recognition that we believed we didn't need them. President Varix activated his personal communicator. Get me a direct channel to Earth immediately. Sir, human space is closed to all foreign communications. They've erected a complete communications blockade around their territory. What about trade? Suspended. Humans are no longer accepting any visitors, cargo, or diplomatic contact from Council species. The reality of their situation began to sink in. The galaxy's most important species had quietly withdrawn, taking with them the hidden infrastructure that made interstellar civilization possible. And they had done it so thoroughly that no one could even contact them to apologize or negotiate. How long can galactic civilization continue without human support? Asked the Vrex delegate. Vol looked at her projections. Based on current trends, major economic collapse within 6 months. Complete breakdown of interstellar cooperation within 2 years. Multiple wars between major powers within 3 years. And if the plague continues to spread, extinction of at least 3 species within 5 years. President Varix stood up slowly. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we have made the greatest mistake in Council history. We dismissed the species that was holding our entire civilization together. The Keth representative's lights dimmed. The collective's analysis indicates a logical solution. We must convince the humans to return and resume their previous functions. And how do you propose we do that? Asked Minister Kelks. We insulted them, dismissed their contributions, and told them they weren't important enough to matter. Now our civilization is collapsing without them, and they won't even take our calls. No one had an answer to that question. Outside the meeting room, the galaxy continued its slow spiral toward chaos. And somewhere in human space, Ambassador Chun watched the reports of galactic collapse with a mixture of sadness and grim satisfaction. The council chamber that had once buzzed with confident voices now echoed with desperation and anger. 2 years after Analyst Vol's devastating revelation, President Variks faced the worst crisis in galactic history. Half the seats in the Great Hall sat empty as smaller species had withdrawn from the council entirely. "Order! Order!" Variks shouted over the chaos. 3 separate arguments were happening at once. Delegates pointing fingers and making accusations in a dozen different languages. The Rex delegate stood up, his rocky skin flushed dark with rage. "The hegemony has lost 60% of our commercial traffic. Our expansion into the Sagittarius arm has been a complete disaster. The Kef Collective has suffered similar efficiency losses," announced the machine-like representative, its lights flickering with what seemed like distress. "Our terraforming projects have failed. Our mining operations cannot function without proper soil conditioning protocols." Commissioner Yelm, now representing the Thanos emergency government, slammed her hand on her desk. "While you worry about profits, my people are dying. The Cygnus plague has reached 14 systems. We've lost 3 entire colonies." "And whose fault is that?" snapped the Vrex delegate. "If the Thanos had proper medical facilities instead of depending on outsiders." "We did depend on outsiders." Yelm shot back. "We depended on the humans. And you convinced us we didn't need them." President Variks looked around the chamber at the chaos his leadership had created. The great galactic civilization was tearing itself apart. Minister Kalks approached the podium with a data tablet in his hands. "Mr. President, I have the latest reports from our emergency task forces. Go ahead." The refugee crisis has spread to 37 systems. Over 50 million displaced beings are living in overcrowded, dangerous conditions. Disease and violence are spreading through every refugee settlement. What about the trade situation? Commercial traffic between major powers has dropped by 73%. Shipping routes that took days now take months to negotiate. Several governments have imposed complete trade embargoes on their neighbors. Military conflicts, border wars have broken out in 6 regions. The Zelathi-Thanis conflict has escalated to full military engagement. 3 minor species have been completely conquered by their larger neighbors. Variks closed his eyes. Each number represented millions of lives disrupted, thousands of deaths, entire civilizations in collapse. "Any progress on establishing communication with Earth?" "None, sir. Human space remains completely closed. They've ignored every diplomatic message, trade offer, and emergency request we've sent." "What about going through intermediary species?" "All species that maintain good relationships with humans have either withdrawn from the Council or refused to help us. Apparently, word has spread about how we treated the human delegation." The Rex delegate stood up again. "This is ridiculous. We're the major powers of the galaxy. How can one small species hold the entire Council hostage?" Commissioner Yelm laughed bitterly. "They're not holding us hostage. They're just not saving us from our own stupidity anymore. We could force them to cooperate," suggested a Zelathi military advisor. The chamber fell silent. Everyone stared at him. "Are you suggesting military action against Earth?" President Variks asked quietly. "If necessary. Humanity has responsibilities to galactic civilization. They can't just abandon us when we need them." Analyst Vol, now promoted to Senior Strategic Advisor, stood up from her seat. "Sir, I've analyzed the military option extensively. It would be the worst possible decision we could make." "Explain." "First, human space is completely sealed. We have no idea what their current military capabilities are, but they've had 2 years to prepare for possible attacks. Second, even if we conquered Earth, we'd only be getting unwilling cooperation from a people who hate us. Third, and most importantly, the other minor species are watching this situation very carefully. What do you mean? Sir, 37 smaller species have withdrawn from the Council in the past year. They're all asking the same question. If the major powers will attack humans for refusing to help us, what's to stop us from attacking them when they disagree with our policies? President Varix understood immediately. Military action against Earth would destroy what little remained of galactic cooperation. What alternatives do we have? We could try to rebuild the support systems that humans used to manage, suggested the Keth representative. How long would that take? Vol checked her projections. Based on our current resources and expertise, approximately 15 to 20 years to establish basic refugee processing capabilities. 30 to 40 years to develop effective disease monitoring systems. We might never achieve the diplomatic mediation skills that humans provided. What about hiring human experts individually? We've tried that approach, sir. No human citizen will work for any council species. Apparently, Earth has made it illegal for their people to provide assistance to former council members. Illegal? Yes, sir. The official Earth government position is that council species rejected human assistance and declared themselves capable of managing their own affairs. Therefore, any human who helps council species is interfering with our sovereign right to handle our own problems. The cruel irony was not lost on anyone in the chamber. The same logic they had used to dismiss human aid was now being used to prevent human assistance. What about the smaller species that withdrew from the council? Asked Minister Kelks. Could we negotiate with them? Several have already established trade agreements with Earth, Vol replied. The Altarians, Centauri Federation, and Free Worlds Alliance have all been accepted into something called the Neutral Cooperation Zone, administered by humanity. What's that? From what we can determine, it's exactly what humans originally proposed to the Council. A system of neutral zones where different species can interact safely, with humans providing medical services, diplomatic mediation, and humanitarian assistance. President Varix felt sick to his stomach. So they're doing for others what they used to do for us? Yes, sir. And apparently, it's working very well. The minor species in the neutral cooperation zone have seen significant improvements in trade, security, and quality of life, while our civilization falls apart. Yes, yes. Sir, the Vrex delegate was furious. This is unacceptable. Those minor species were under our protection. Humanity is stealing our territory. Commissioner Yelm stood up slowly. No, they're not. They're offering those species what we should have offered them all along. Real partnership instead of dominance. The Thanis Confederation is withdrawing from this council immediately, she announced. We're going to petition Earth for admission to the Neutral Cooperation Zone. You can't do that, protested the Vrex delegate. Watch us. My people are dying while you argue about politics. If humans are willing to help us survive, I'm going to accept that help. Several other delegates stood up as Commissioner Yelm left the chamber. The council was dissolving before President Varix's eyes. Sir, Minister Kelk said quietly, we've received a response to our latest communication with Earth. What did they say? Kelks activated a holographic display. Ambassador Chun's image appeared, older now and dressed in simple Earth clothing. People of the Galactic Council, the recording began. 2 years ago, humanity offered partnership, cooperation, and assistance to your civilization. We were told that our contributions were minimal and our concerns were irrelevant. We were advised to focus on our own development rather than galactic affairs. We have taken your advice. We are focusing on our own development and the development of those species wise enough to choose cooperation over domination. We are building the kind of galaxy we originally envisioned, one based on mutual assistance rather than power politics. You have declared yourselves capable of managing galactic affairs without human involvement. We respect your decision and will not interfere with your sovereign right to handle your own problems. We wish you success in proving that you were correct about not needing us." The recording ended. President Varix stared at the empty space where the hologram had been. "That's it?" he asked. "That's it, sir." Varix looked around the nearly empty chamber. Most of the delegates had left during the recording. The great galactic civilization that had ruled the stars for millennia was reduced to a handful of major powers sitting in a mostly empty room. Outside the council chambers, the galaxy continued its spiral toward chaos. Trade wars escalated into shooting wars. Refugee crises became humanitarian disasters. Disease spread unchecked through populations with no one to monitor or treat. New outbreaks. But in human space and the growing neutral cooperation zone, a different kind of civilization was emerging. One based on the quiet values that the Council had rejected. Cooperation instead of competition. Service instead of dominance. Problem-solving instead of power politics. Years passed. The old council eventually collapsed, completely as its member species either destroyed each other in wars or petitioned to join the neutral cooperation zone. The galaxy was reorganizing itself around the crust of principles that humans had quietly practiced all along. And in her new office on Harmony Station, the diplomatic center of the neutral cooperation zone, Ambassador Chun read reports of successful refugee resettlement, effective disease prevention, and peaceful resolution of interspecies conflicts.